Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says, powered by Design 2147, a New York City building and code consulting firm. Today, I have Julia Maksimova from KW Commercial. Julia, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Sisto. Thanks for having me.
So usually when we start our show, we always talk about the power of people. And you're here because I was invited to a networking group called Biz Devel that both of us are part of, and I'm very proud of it. Thank you. I am now an actual member of the networking group, and part of it is meeting people. It's not about jobs, but meeting people, and we met. And we've been together now through the networking group for about a year, and I've been begging you to get you on the show, and you're here, so thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, Julia, tell us a little bit about what you do. You're in the commercial real estate market here in New York City, and there's a lot to talk about. We could probably spend hours talking to you about pre-COVID, post-COVID, where we are today, but just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up being in the commercial real estate world.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again. So I started my career at Cushman & Wakefield. I was an intern in the research department in Moscow. I'm originally from Russia.
Oh, wow.
2005, my second year of undergrad. And I did Moscow research internship and then New York research internship, and I would switch in my summer breaks or winter breaks from school. I would come to New York office and I would work out of this office, and then I would go back and work in Moscow
Very
office.
interesting.
So when I graduated in 2008, we know those times were not so great for employment. I actually already had a job lined up with Cushman & Wakefield in the research division doing retail.
Here in New York?
Here in New York.
Oh, here.
My job was monitoring lease comps and writing market beat reports and all that fun stuff.
Yep.
And then I saw how much brokers were making.
Wait a second, I'm getting shortchanged here. I'm giving them all the information and they're not paying me enough.
Yeah. Well, I saw all the great deals they were doing for Agamo and, Madison Avenue, the glamorous stuff.
Sure.
And as a woman, as a girl at the time, I was like, wow, this is something I can really relate to. And I love the, fashion and real estate. So that kind of became my interest. And 2009, I was let go from Cushman, last in, first out. And I decided this is a great time to become a broker.
Absolutely.
Why not?
Right.
So I kind of learned on the go. I went to a company that was doing kind of tertiary markets at the time, like Hell's Kitchen. We had some great clients as well, but, Harlem and Hell's Kitchen.
They were in the up.
Midtown.
They were taking a chance in the up and coming areas, right?
Yeah, like we had Columbia University was one of the clients, Stonehenge. Those are great landlords, but had that kind of experience on the ground, being in the weeds of deal making and
sure.
Doing retail leasing. Yeah, doing the retail leasing fun stuff. And from then, I realized that, in the brokerage business, you need to have your own book. You can't just work on somebody else's book of business like in any business, right?
Right.
So
Time to hustle.
It was time to hustle, and I said, if not now, then when? I was young, and I said, let's go to KW Commercial, which is a commercial division of Keller Williams.
Yep.
They just started in New York City at the time. It's a franchise out of the corporate is in Austin. And
great city, by the way.
Yes, great
One of
city.
my favorites.
Great, fun city.
Yes.
I have not been to Austin prior to, but now I've been there multiple times.
That's great.
So kind of they were known for their training and teaching, and really they taught you how to fish and become your own sort of entrepreneur real estate agent. So this is where I am still today. And my focus was still retail leasing. So we did, some local tenants and smaller deals. And
sure, but then there's the bigger deals.
Then there's the bigger deal. So we did the CVS lease in Times Square.
Wonderful.
Part of the real building sort of equity acquisitions team. Everything was done off market. And then I realized that retail was kind of coming to
an end.
To a halt at the time. And I said, well, why do I limit myself to just retail?
Right.
Although at Cushman, they teach you that you need to specialize in niche, which is very true, but I was kind of getting almost bored at the time.
There's always, that's a great point, because even in our business after 40 years, people come to us with very complicated projects because they know that our firm has been known for those. Like we did the TSX Hotel, lifting the landmark theater.
Incredible.
We wrote all of the the reconsiderations and all the code and all of the craziness, and we're known for that. But yet the bread and butter, which is a brand new hotel down the street for Virgin Hotel, right, for Richard Branson, we don't even bid those, but because we were known for that. But in a lot of ways that's really great, but sometimes it's also it hinders you because they say, oh well, they're known for doing repurposing and redeveloping a building versus being out of the ground, and that's the furthest from the truth because we do everything. So
Exactly.
broadening your horizons just gives you more opportunities to make money.
For sure. I wanted to learn and I wanted to do other types of deals. So since then, I did office leasing, industrial leasing. I did mixed-use investment sales, office condo sales, and everything in between. Okay. Which it's exciting, and you're learning. Every deal is different.
Without a doubt.
Just recently, I had a commercial co-op that you've helped me figure out the code for, the zoning for, that us actually we're in contract, and it's going to be converted to residential. So that's really interesting, and not something that I've ever done. So that was kind of what I was doing at the time, and this was pre-COVID. And at some point, actually, I was working on hotel deals, so hotels for sale. We were master leasing hotels for transient use, for hotel use, so companies like Sonder and other competitors at the time. And that was my focus right before COVID. So 2019,
hotels.
I'm trading hotels. I'm
the
doing
whole
master
market
leases
dies.
of hotels. And everything just stops.
And it's funny, to stay on that topic for a minute, because I think that's a really great topic to talk about today. We do a lot of hotels. We're looking at quite a few right now that were old law tenements that need major rehab, and a lot of developers and equity partners are looking at making them residential and hotel together, and that seems to be a place where it's going. But I also been reading that, there's a lot of new laws that are coming into effect in New York City related to hotels, besides zoning, and you have to go to, get a special permit and all these things. It's getting harder and harder to build a hotel in one of the busiest tourist places in the world. So sometimes I scratch my head and say, are we making progress, or are we going, what is the hotel real estate world like these days in terms of buying, selling, because it seems to be all over the place.
It's all over the place. And as a result of what you just said, hotels have been trading. I mean, I think was it the Thompson that traded for over $1 million a key. The one hotel on 6th Avenue was sold for, a great number. And this is a result of restricted, construction laws and
supply and demand.
And since rebound of business travel, I mean, we're not 100% there, but people are coming back to New York for business travel, and there's tourism.
All I could say is I was in Europe for a couple of weeks, my wife and I, and we were going around through Europe. There were people everywhere. I mean, people just want to travel right now, and the airports are crowded. The streets of Italy were especially in the big cities in France, it was crowded. So, I'm sure New York is the same thing. But, nowadays you try to get a room in Manhattan, it's like impossible. It's crazy.
Supply and demand. And then they killed Airbnb in New York City, right? So by Airbnb, I mean under 30 days stays, so transient stays.
Right.
They've killed that, or they've sort of started to implement the law more strict.
Right. So they're actually enforcing it.
They're enforcing it. So now, again, your supply is kind of low, right? With the greater demand for coming to.
So whoever has availability gets to charge more, and there's less for them to choose from. We actually have, we just restarted another one off of Hudson Yards, not in Hudson Yards, but to just to the west of it. To the east a little bit, so it's not right in Hudson, but a couple of blocks away, and it's been stalled for 3 years, and we're just restarting it. We just put in another proposal for another hotel. So there seems to be a little bit of movement, but the problem right now is that to get through it just takes too long. Between the special permits and everything that's going with it, it's crazy. It's crazy.
The special permit I hear is like at least 6 months, right? To get
6 months to a year minimum.
right? So your cost of capital, right? Like let's
Correct,
talk about
and
that.
that's right.
How much can you,
Well,
stretch without cash flowing in?
Exactly, because you're buying the site at this premium because really, I spoke to a developer this morning before our show, and the reason I called him is because he buys in a lot of different types of real estate. And I asked him, he's looking for new developments to do affordable housing. And he said to me, he said, Sisto, the prices have not come down. He goes, they just haven't. People think, oh, the interest rates are high, but if people don't need to move the site, they're sticking to their guns because they feel it may not happen this year, it may not happen next year, but you're never going to lose money on your land in New York City. It very rarely does it ever go. If you have a building and you have assets with it, that could be a problem. But when you got vacant land in a prime spot,
Right. Well, your cost bases are probably very low. You probably don't have. You're never over leveraged. What I'm hearing is actually the feds are mandating the banks to get the bad loans off their books.
of course.
So now you're going to start seeing more people forced to sell.
Well,
And in order to trade, you need to have capital to buy. So unless you're cash or you have, some kind of access to decent rates, there's buyers, but there's not that many buyers.
one of the biggest things that we talked about, and I know residential isn't really, your world, but it impacts everything around, right? So, several years ago when we had and I've told this story many times before, we have a family that we used to do apartment renovations, and they would send us 3 or 4 a month. Great client. Great client, paid their bills, wonderful people. And one day he calls me up and he said, "Hey, sis, I need to talk to you." I'm like, "What's up?" He goes, they changed the rent laws, and we're not going to spend $100,000 of apartment to raise the rent $90 for the next 30 years. It just, he goes, and I wanted to personally tell you that I have asked, and this is how honorable this family was, is that we've had 3 generations of families who worked for my grandparents that were painters, that were carpenters. Their grandparents worked for me, their sons worked for me, and then their sons or their daughters worked for us in any kind of capacity, whether it was painting, sheetrocking, tile. They laid everybody off.
Wow.
They said we just can't do it. Now they're not leveraged, right? Because they're fine. But somebody who took a 10-year note based on these rents and rents going up, their asset is diminished incredibly.
You're under. If you have a floating rate, you don't have the same cash flow. You can't raise the rents, right? You're capped on your upside.
I don't know how many of these buildings, and then throw on local law 97. Make sure you do this by this date. Make sure you do that. Pump more money and do more. Rip all your gas out and put in electric. I mean, it's a crazy world right now in what we're experiencing. And in my 40 years, I've never seen it like this, where developers are basically, especially in New York City, a lot of developers we talk to, even when at BizDevel, they're like, yeah, we're going to build in Philly. We're building in Nashville. Yeah, there's plenty of other markets. Oh, we went into Westchester. We're building in Mount Vernon, or, anywhere where there's a train line and there's transit, It's a scary time. So tell us a little bit about, I hear different things. I hear that the retail market is actually starting to rebound a little bit. I mean, we're seeing some of it on the higher end stores along Madison and Fifth Avenue. We've seen that. But we've also been hearing that the retail space as we know it is changing. So tell us a little bit about, what's happened since Amazon's came to the game, bigger spaces for some type of uses, smaller spaces for others. So give us because we still see a lot of signs up that there's a lot of retail space for rent.
Yeah, I think what I was kind of mentioning before, even this was 2017, when we did the CVS deal in Times Square, which is a prime retail corridor, we saw that rents were high. That was probably the peak of the market. retailers weren't really expanding. So rents started to drop off a little bit. And right around COVID, and I guess landlords realized that they really need to lower the rents and lower
Yeah.
their expectations. So since COVID, actually rents have adjusted for after COVID, sort of numbers. So that's a positive thing. Because of that, there's been much more trading of retail and retail leasing activity. So that's
Makes
just
sense. If
right,
it was overpriced, then
right,
they wouldn't do it.
right. But at the same time, yes, we're seeing a lot of uptick in luxury, right? People, I mean, we read about LVMH buying their building and
Right.
Valentino, looking at the same, and just luxury is, they have so much money, they almost don't know what to do with it.
Right.
So they're starting to buy their own real estate to control and to have that competitive advantage.
Right.
Because those assets are just going to appreciate over time. It's prime.
If they
of the
had
prime.
if they had $100 million banked somewhere, they put $100 million in a piece of real estate in New York City. At some point, when they don't want it anymore, and if they
Right.
stay there long enough, then it's
going to go
crazy.
up in value. They can lease
Yeah,
it
of
out,
course.
right? So we've been seeing that on the luxury side. Now on the sort of middle market or the other retail side, we were just talking about this. So Walgreens, Rite Aid, right? All those guys are consolidating. They're
Yeah.
Joanna Reeder's closing stores, or Walgreens, Joanna Reeder's closing stores, Rite Aid's closing stores. I was just reading about CVS in their performance and how
well it's
the store sales are down.
well, the store sales are down because
Amazon.
a perfect example is, you used to say, wife, 3 kids, right? Always at CVS. The
Right.
kids need something.
Right.
And you're in a pinch. Oh, we need, copy paper. Okay, everything's closed. I'm not going to Staples. Just run to CVS. When you're in
Right.
there, you're picking up this, that.
Right.
It's like a little supermarket. They got everything plus prescriptions.
Correct.
Well, since Amazon came in it, now even Amazon's going to have a pharmaceutical side of it. So
Yes.
you're going to have, little by little, Amazon's expanded into everyone. So even if they only take 5% of the market, 5% and 5% here and 5% there and next thing you know, they can't compete. And a lot of the
Well, they can't.
CVS's, the ones that they're renting the spaces, I'm sure the rents are crazy. But
Yes.
once you leave the 5 boroughs, most of those are ground leases that they're on. They don't even own the property. They own the structure, but they don't really own the ground. And those ground leases are probably getting very expensive now, and they just don't have the business.
Right. I mean, the margins are squeezed, right? Their prescription business is not as high anymore, right? Because there are
So much more
alternative-
competition.
Right. Amazon, Capsule, all these other.
Whatever, MedX, everybody, you can, everybody does it. You do it online. It's
And then they bought Aetna, so that was
Right.
a whole nother conversation. Now the costs of running that business are higher than they predicted because of the new
because they
laws.
thought that they would get people off the street to go and get
Correct.
their flu shots and do all
Correct.
their things. And
But now you can get everything from Amazon, not everything, but a lot of things from Amazon the next day or within 1 hour,
and
right?
not even leaving, and
Not
you
even
don't
leaving
drive
the
to
building.
CVS, get there, and they don't even have it.
Right.
Because the shelves are empty, you
Right.
know.
And also, let's talk about the store experience. I mean, you go to CVS, or not so much maybe in CVS, but I've seen it at Walgreens and Jan Reed. Everything is locked up.
and you got to
Your-
wait 10
the
minutes for a
deodorant
person.
is just like,
I just
it's not convenient anymore.
My wife says, "Sister, I was trying to get you some razor blades." She says, "I waited 15 minutes." She says, "I'm sorry, just get them on Amazon."
Right,
That's
it's
my
frustrating.
wife, right? Because she was getting
frustrating.
angry. She had things to do and places to go, and they got 2 people there. So
Right, understaffed.
unfortunately, we it's a real estate show, but these are the things that affect everything that we all do in the New York City, across the country market of real estate, because it affects brokerage, it affects landlords. Landlords don't have the extra money. They're not repurposing their buildings. They're holding on. There's no energy in it. And, when there's that energy, it's crazy how much it just it puts its tentacles out everywhere. And right now it just seems like there's this, I don't want to be like, I'm not a Debbie Downer, but it just seems like there's always this little bit of cloud that we just start to get going, and then all of a sudden we go, oh, now this happened or that happened. And it just seems like so even in the retail world, we worked on that really big outlet in Staten Island. We filed the whole thing, and Goldman took it over. They had a rough time because it was in the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
And then the flip side is that a lot of people are shopping online. They're not.
Right. Well, that's a great point. To go into a store, you need to have some kind of unique experience, right? People are seeking experience because you're sitting in your office or you're working from home, right? You want something different. You want to experience.
You don't want it to be boring. You want something.
So unless you're, 2 clicks and you have your stuff from Amazon, that's very convenient. But on the other side, if you go into a store and you really enjoy that experience, you will do it.
Right.
People love that. But
of course,
you kind of have to think about retail in the sense of what experience are you providing to your customers. That's differentiated from the 2-click Amazon experience.
Many years ago, when we were working on the hotel, we would often wonder why the Gap would rent this massive space off of 42nd Street, massive. Meanwhile, you go and you read all these things, and finally one developer once said to me that he had met with a CEO of a marketing company. Mm-hmm. And he said, what they spend in advertisement throughout the country in the United States, they get more exposure in one night on New Year's Eve of how many times that camera hits that Gap sign on the around the world. Forget New York City. Right. Around the world, that's brand recognition for if you were watching it in Moscow or you were watching it in Rome, wherever you are, someone's seen the Gap sign, right? So
it's a marketing expense.
It's a marketing expense, but now with social media. That they know that people aren't really tuning into that. Fran, who's the producer of this show, he does a lot of different things. And it's always about how many people are spending time on their phone and just looking at an experience of what other people are doing. And they want to know if they can get into that experience. So you're right. You look at the news, Walgreens has nothing on the shelves. You go to Home Depot, you can't get anybody to help you. You go to this place. Right. So as time goes on, people get beat up by it, and that affects our market. That affects it. How many, not everybody can go to Louis Vuitton every day and buy a bag or go to, these high-end places. So what do you think is going to happen with this middle-of-the-road retail that's vacant in Manhattan?
I think, one thing I can tell you for a fact is F&B, food and beverage, is still going great, very strong. QSR, quick service restaurants, fine dining, they're just taking up spaces, right? So because we can't eat online, right? We need to have that service, that experience, and walking into
and even
a
if you
space.
are eating online, it's because somebody's cooking it somewhere and they're delivering it to you. So they still need the brick and mortar to create the food. So.
Correct. So we see a lot of activity from just restaurants or food operators, very strong. On the retail side, I think it goes back to, efficiency of a store. What kind of experience can you create in that store? Do you really need the 10,000 square foot, 5,000 square foot
That's
square
what
foot
we're
space?
noticing, smaller spaces.
And if you do, then again, what are you doing in that space to make it a differentiated experience from the convenience of online shopping?
Correct.
So I think that's the trend. I think, again, food or services like, barbershops and, those things will just stay. Those
part of the city of yes that, obviously is really a big topic right now from now till the end of the year, how it's going to get ratified, what it's going to look like. But part of it is to introduce, remember, the uses that were in 1961 when they created the zoning, they're outdated. People aren't, there's no manufacturing of buttons in New York City anymore. They're not making burlap bags anymore in New York City. But yet, at the same way, those uses are still in the zoning resolution, but there's new uses. There's these mini self-storage. There's these little mini, catering house. Like you said, maybe maybe they don't have people coming off the street, but all of their businesses via the internet, and they cook meals, right? And the deliveries. Well, what use is that? Well, that use is food processing. You got to be in a manufacturing district, really. So it has to be the city of yes. It can't be the city of no. So we're gonna have to adapt to this new urban lifestyle, right? And unfortunately, you're the first one in it when an entrepreneur comes and says, "Hey, Julia, this is a beautiful space. I'd love to lease this. And then you go, okay, well, what are you going to do with it? And he goes, I'm going to do this. And you go, oh, and then, so it's tough, so they're going to have to, the city and everyone else around it, they're going to have to find a way to make it, because if not, we're going to have a lot of small mom and pop shops that were around forever that closed up, and they're going to stay empty.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So tell us a little bit about I know the Class A office is always doing great. All the big corporations want to be in the new buildings at Hudson Yards, and we read about it every day. And
you'll be actually surprised about Hudson Yards.
Really?
What we hear from tenants is now the Park Avenue corridor has become more popular because it's convenient transportation, right? Long Island Railroad now stops there. And once that happened, I can tell you that corridor filled up.
Filled up.
Well,
because before they used to have to go all the way to the west side to come back. Now, if you live in Long Island, Queens, everything goes right. So,
right there.
But all in all,
the product. I think the product is what you're talking about.
Correct.
It's definitely
not the location, but the product.
Right.
But then we get to the next level, right? And we talk about the Class B, and from what I've been, we talked offline about this, is that from some of the because we don't really do a lot of office fit out. Mm-hmm. We do quite a bit, but that's not like, we don't do 30 floors in one building. That's not our thing, but we do quite a bit of it. It seems to be that the Class B buildings are adding the amenity spaces. I don't want to use the word cleaning up the building, but rebranding or re-imaging the building with the lobby, the entrances, a little bit of amenities on the roof, things like that. Right. And it seems that the people that we spoke to, that market is strong, but not in big chunks of spaces, in a little bit smaller spaces. But the place where they're getting hammered is the Class Cs. The older, outdated buildings are just tough.
Right. I mean, there's been a lot of conversation, flight to quality, right? So everybody's going for Class A. Whoever cannot afford to be in a Class A going for the upgraded B or like a B plus, right? This is what you just talked about.
Right.
And even having all these amenities, same with residential. It's great to have those amenities.
But you got to pay for it.
You're paying for it, but also are you really using it is another question. But that being said, I think, B at some point became like a commodity product. And unless you really renovate, you're competing on price, and that's the last thing you want to do, especially if you're leveraged up, right? On the C, that's a big problem, I think, and City of Yes has to do something about it for sure.
Without a doubt,
right? Because it's too antiquated to renovate it. You're better off just demolishing it. I mean,
and the problem is that when you demolish it, if they're leveraged a little bit, they're not going to get their price. They're not going to sell it. It's going to stay there. It becomes an eyesore until some developer decides they want it. And then by that time, you've wrecked the neighborhood for 5 years because it's an eyesore. We have a couple of projects that have been stalled for years, and the community board shut the project down. They didn't want the housing in their backyard, and now it sits there for 4 years as this eyesore. Right. And now they're getting complaints from all the people in the neighborhood going, my God, there's abandoned cars there, people park in front of it. It's terrible. It's not,
listen, sorry to interrupt, but if you think about cost of capital and who's going to bank a ground up site, right? And what's the cost of that? I mean, banks are very stringent now on their lending.
Very tough.
Right? So that's even, it kind of amplifies the problem of, what do you do in the meantime? What do you do with this? Can you actually buy it from the buyer's perspective for a basis point that makes sense? So it's a big problem.
That's part of, that's also part of the, office to residential conversion. That part of City of Yes is that they're trying to release some of those restrictions, but they also have to have a part of it where they partner up and give the developers incentives. The best way to get housing is to have
like the 421A.
Right. And, we've had many conversations. People call me all the time about, the 85X, what's going on? How's it looking? We haven't gotten any. I just spoke to a developer yesterday. He goes, Sisto, we're still putting paper to pencil. We don't know if this really works. Because if it was that good, everybody would have jumped in. They're just not jumping in.
Yeah.
They're not they're doing condos. Almost
that's
most of our stuff right now that's new out of the ground, Julia, are all condos.
Yeah.
It's just a different market. So,
but the conversion, actually, I toured yesterday the 55 Broad. the
said it was beautiful.
the Metro Loft. What is it, Rudin and Silverstein?
Yeah.
They did a beautiful job.
Beautiful
and
job.
So fast. I mean, it's only been like a year and a half.
Yeah, and again,
And that's 574 or 5 units. Rentals. Because,
amazing.
Right?
It was an amazing project. But again, it always talks about cost basis. You know, what did they get that property for? What did they spend, and how did they make it happen? Because if you're overpaying for the you can't.
You gotta buy it right.
You got to buy it right. If not, you can't afford to do it because rehab has a lot of risk to it.
But also converting a whole building, that's a whole nother complexity. You really need to know what you're doing, and you're running against time, right? I mean, you have
you're
a
running
construction
against
line.
time, and there's a lot of unknowns. Once you get in there and you start opening it,
Yeah.
you know, you don't know what you're up against.
Right.
You know, with a new building, once you get out of your foundation, you really know what you're up against.
You're
you know,
building
there's
from
no
scratch,
deviation. But when you're doing a rehab and you start pulling the skin off and you start getting in it and you're doing the windows and you're doing the elevators and you start. There's a million problems, so there's got to be a very large contingency. But I get that project is going to be a major success.
It's beautiful.
No question.
It's beautiful, yeah.
No question. So as we, you know, my good friend Andrew Peters that I met at BizDevel from Curry and Brown, we always talk about, he's an estimator. He has to tell people what something will cost 2 years from now without a drawing. And someone comes and says, "Hey, I want to build a new CVS." And he says, "Okay, it's going to cost you X per square foot." And he's got to guess that they are going to start that construction in a year from now, rent the space, do the drawings, get it ready. And he's got to estimate so that they could figure out if this project is right, if it's feasible, and does it make sense? So his saying is he needs to look at history, but he always has to look forward. So on the show, every guest gets this one question. It's never a trick question. I always ask the guests to give us one prediction about one sector of what they do. So you could pick anyone you want, whether it's retail or commercial office, commercial real estate, industrial, whatever you want. Where do you see where we are now, and what would you think a year from now? Where do you think that market will be?
Yeah, I would pick the retail side of things. I would say luxury is going to continue to do well. I would say the middle of the road retail space has to get repurposed, otherwise, or it will be converted to residential. Right. I mean, we've seen that kind of happen with medical, where they have medical like tiny co-op medical spaces, and those were
the mom
obsolete.
and pop doctor's not in the neighborhood anymore doing that. They go to city care down the street, and
So I think the prime is going to just stay primer. Right. It's still going to be Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue. Like you said, it's a billboard. It's a billboard for brands, for luxury.
Correct.
For
tourists.
For tourists and locals as well.
And locals as well, sure. I mean, you live on the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side. You want to walk down the street and shop on your way home from work. Or,
you have to also provide an amazing experience to your customers as a retailer. And then the other spaces, the side streets or, kind of tertiary areas, they have to get repurposed. There's no other way. You're going to, keep it vacant. For how long can you do that? So I think the city of Yes has to do something about what they allow. Is it, like you said, self-storage? Is it some kind of last mile?
Right. Again, the word there is repurposing. But when you go back to a book that was written 63 years ago and it hasn't really been amended to change uses, and we're in a different world of technology now. There's different needs. Maybe years ago you needed X, but now you need Y. Well, but there is no Y. So that's why they can't use it. I use a very quick thing before we end our show, and this is as true as it becomes. A family friend of ours has a funeral parlor business in Brooklyn, and they lost their lease. And he's been looking for a space forever. And he sent me at least 8 or 9 of them. And they were retail spaces in the neighborhood where people, again, community, a person passes away in the neighborhood, an elderly person, they need to walk to the funeral parlor. They don't need to drive there. They're in a little neighborhood in Brooklyn or in Queens. We looked at so many spaces. We could not find one that would work because it wasn't a high enough commercial. And if we were converting it, we needed a loading berth. Well, we couldn't put in a loading berth because we can't get a curb cut. Well, we can't get a curb cut because the streets are too narrow. And it's this and it's that. They literally, the zoning is so antiquated that they literally have put the family out of business.
Wow.
Because, so you're going to go to Sunset Park, you're going to go to, off the back end of the Gowanus that still has manufacturing where you're allowed to put, who's going to go to a funeral parlor on the other end? So most of the funeral parlors that you see here in New York City, they were predated prior to 1961, unless you're in a big neighborhood somewhere, where there's less density, right? In Queens or something, where there was a big piece of land. So in many, many community boards, you can't even open a new funeral parlor. It's very sad. So, they have to do something, because you can't keep putting all the mom and pop shops out of business. The shoemaker and the little pharmacy.
But
And
we
we
also
all
need
need
those. We need that.
We need it.
I like my shoes done well.
Me too. I like to go to my neighborhood person who knows me and ask you, "Hey,
Right.
Julia, how you doing today? How's things?" There's a connection. You go to them day in, week in and week out for many years. And to me, as a true New Yorker, I feel that we've lost that. Other things have popped up that are more glamorous, but we've lost that you knew that person that was, where you got
The
your dry
butcher
cleaning
and the
done.
cleaner,
Right.
right.
Even for our families, we've lost that.
Right. Well, we're on the phones. People are scrolling all day long. I mean, that's what's happening.
It's sad, but it's part of the world. But Julia, very, very great show. Love to have
Thank
you. I'm
you,
glad
Sisto.
you finally made it.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I'm sorry for being such a nudge, but I knew you would be a great guest.
I love coming here, and thank you for inviting me.
And we're going to have you back on again.
Awesome.
And a shout out to all our friends at Biz DeVell.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.